Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Vince Campisi. Vince is the Chief Digital Officer and Senior Vice President of Enterprise Services at Raytheon Technologies, a nearly $60 billion revenue multinational aerospace and defense conglomerate. He oversees the company's digital technology strategy and several global business services designed to reduce enterprise risk, optimize operating efficiency, enable business growth, and maximize outcomes for employees, suppliers, and customers. Vince came into this role after Raytheon's merger with United Technologies, where he had been the chief digital officer. Vince has led a remarkable digital transformation across Raytheon, and I look forward to speaking with him about it. Vince, welcome back to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Great to see you as well.
Well, Vince, you are the Chief Digital Officer and SVP of Enterprise Services at Raytheon Technologies. And Raytheon Technologies is a really vast conglomerate. Probably most listeners would have heard of it, but it probably is also worth giving a little bit of an overview of the business. So maybe take a moment, if you would, and describe it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll shorthand it as RTX. That's our stock ticker. So at the end of the day, our mission statement is all about a safer, more connected world. That's the backdrop of who we are and what we do. We serve two broad markets, right? So we're a pure play aerospace and defense company. One is the aerospace market. So our customers there would be aircraft manufacturers like a Boeing or an Airbus. And then ultimately the end consumer is the airlines that we all know and love and use, for our own personal travel. Supporting that, we've got two units. One is Pratt & Whitney. They make aircraft engines. So I think that's a pretty straightforward product that most people would get their head around quickly. And then our Collins Aerospace division really handles tip to tail, right? So upfront cockpit, every other critical system on the aircraft. And so that's half of our portfolio. The other is around supporting defense, right? So the US government would be a major customer of ours, as well as all the allies around the world. And in that segment, we're generally talking about things that protect the warfighter. So that would be missile and defense systems, but that would also be intelligence and space systems. So, that ranges from a whole host of capabilities that are designed to protect the world as we know it. So that's a bit about RTX and the portfolio of businesses, within the company.
Great. And you came to RTX by virtue of the company's merger with United Technologies, where you had been prior to the successful merger, which I believe concluded in April of 2020. What was the rationale for the combination? And maybe if you wouldn't mind providing a little bit of context, how has the integration gone so far?
Yeah, well, the last time we tagged up, a lot has changed.
Yes, exactly.
The adage goes, you don't have to change companies. There's so much change happening around you. And so shortly after we connected, I think it was probably 2018, we did one of the largest aerospace acquisitions at the time, acquiring a company called Rockwell Collins, and that created that division I spoke of Collins Aerospace. And then in 2019, we announced the divestiture and the spinoffs of Otis Elevators and Carrier Heating and Cooling. So those became two standalone companies in their own right, which were formerly part of United Technologies. And on the same day, not to try and challenge ourselves, we did a merger of equals. And that was bringing together the aerospace parts of United Technologies with Raytheon Corporation. And so on April 3rd, 2020, we relisted four companies on the New York Stock Exchange. So, four tickers changed all in one day because of an amazing group of people doing a lot of hard work that I would consider sort of first of its kind.
Yeah, very interesting. And I mentioned at the outset that you're the Chief Digital Officer and Head of Enterprise Services for the company. Talk a bit about, so it seems like two sides of what's described in terms of your responsibilities. Describe those if you would.
Yeah, sure. As a Chief Digital Officer for the company, we're generally, focused on what you would expect, right? This is about securing and protecting the company, having a resilient digital infrastructure. This is things like cloud computing and collaboration capabilities for employees. This is all about how do you provide the right technology to support business processes. These are generally where you find, all of that sort of ERP technology and those sorts of things. Data architecture, a company like us, analytics is a huge part of what we do and how we perform. And then ultimately, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about it, the capstone of that is we talk about it as creating a digital thread. How do you ultimately reimagine the speed in which and how we create the technologies that we create and how we bring them to market faster and of higher quality? The other part is, when you talk about enterprise services, this is really how do we leverage the power of the portfolio that we have and look for economies of scale across the company. And so I would summarize that in two ways. One is this is really how we digitize and operate shared service capabilities like HR, finance, procurement. And so that's part of our organization because we see an opportunity to really digitize it and automate it. And we've got a goal to drive 5 million hours of productivity through the use of automation by 2025. And we'll probably finish this year halfway on the path of that goal. And the second is, we've got probably an 80 million square foot real estate portfolio. And as you would imagine right now, every company's reimagining, hey, what's the role of our facilities? How are we going to enable collaboration in new ways? And that's a part of the mission of the team is how do we optimize that footprint, but also how do we make it more impactful to support employees in light of the fact that we're all going to be working significantly differently than we were just a couple of years ago. So that's a little bit about, the team and what we focus on.
That's great. I would love to go back to the point you raised as the capstone of your responsibilities, creating a digital thread, as you put it, reimagining the speed with which we bring technology to market. Talk a bit about what that entails, the methods that you're using. Talk a bit about that digital thread in greater detail, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about our customers, they are generally trying to figure out a technology that's going to give them a significantly competitive advantage and really redefine what they're trying to accomplish. And the world we now live in is a world where everyone is speccing out what a solution might look like, and then they're providing it to us in a digital context. And so now we're competing on the basis of that model that they're providing us of what they want us to make. No longer are the days where we build a prototype, bend metal, and then a long time later come back and show that prototype working. We now do it in a virtual fashion where we're doing virtual design, simulation. We're competing on the basis of what our simulations and models can demonstrate. And then we move to the stage that says, okay, let's invest behind that and let's go create that. And so it takes risk out of it for both parties, where we are getting smarter about what we want to make and what we should expect of its performance before we have to do significant rounds of investment and significant durations of time to decide, is that really going to achieve what the customer is looking for? So that's the upfront of the digital thread, the upfront sort of design, speed, simulation. And we've got examples where we've got products that every night are running their own simulations, flying 6 million miles over the course of an evening to figure out how it can optimize itself and how it performs under certain conditions, and keeps getting smarter every day thereafter.
Vince, you talked about the way that your team helps bring to life the ability to take what was typically a prototype process, a physical prototype that would be developed in the various parts of the business that you described a moment ago, one that would presumably be very costly and where a lot of rework would be necessary and so forth, and now rendering it virtually. And it strikes me, having spent an awful lot of time personally with Silicon Valley companies, software-based organizations, that the concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product, which I have to imagine historically in your industry, perhaps your company, was a concept that was anathema for the risks implied just by that term, that now you can actually do the same thing. You can get to an MVP virtually, test it, find out where the issues are, have the intended users play around with it and provide feedback, and continue to course correct and improve along the way in a much less expensive and perhaps presumably a much faster way as well to get to greater confidence of success. Talk a bit about that. Is that hypothesis correct? I assume, but talk a bit about sort of like some of the ideas behind it as well.
No, I think it's spot on, right? When you talk about minimally viable, now we are actually in a position where we can digitally create that minimally viable capability, which enhances the understanding between us and the customer. Here's what it won't do. Here's what it can't do. And ultimately reduces the risk of, hey, before you're making big investments, you're still in a purely simulated scenario, and you're testing the parameters of what you can't do, and you're iterating MVPs in a virtual world. Now, we expect, and we have seen examples where that takes the cycle time down by 30%. Now, it also makes you smarter and more clear about what are you going to build and what are the limitations of what you can and can't build and how that affects the performance of what you're hoping for. And so one, MVPs are absolutely alive, and this helps us bring them to life faster. Two, the principles around engineering still hold true. So the safety protocols that we expect, the quality that we expect, this actually enhances it. And there's a concept called the engineering V, which is you've got systems of systems that you're integrating and testing back and forth to go down the V and back up it again. This enables you to do iterations and simulations and MVPs, if you will, down the V, across it, and as you go back up it. So you see that gain in cycle time to bring a product to market going down by an example up to 30%. The cost to manufacture going down by, in many cases, 10, 20, 30%, while protecting the integrity of quality and product performance. And quite frankly, you're actually de-risking it to some degree because you're getting smarter as you're designing and making it. So I think you nailed a very important point of what the digital thread enables in the form of being able to do minimally viable, prototypes along the way.
In an organization as large and complex as the one that you described at the outset of our interview, how do you think about what's done commonly versus those things that naturally need to be bespoke or one-off solutions for a specific business of yours? I can only imagine the complexity, although one you've been grappling with for quite some time is you've worked for a series of conglomerates, GE before UTC, for example. But talk a bit about that thought process, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, we're 2 years young, right? So this is, most employees are at the front seat of not only our industry, but like who we are as a company. But what I found, when you talk about some of those examples of changing the portfolio and the speed of which we did it, when you have very clear goals and a very clear mission, it helps you make decisions quickly and make decisions in support of that mission. And so to your question, I would say we've got very clear goals of what we're trying to do to bring technologies together. When you think about hypersonics, you're at the end of the day, you're trying to produce a product that's going to be able to, fly at 5 to 10 times the speed of sound. And across our portfolio, there are technologies around the company that if we bring them together, will enable us to do that. And so now we're always trying to balance, how do you help make sure our businesses are responding to the needs of their customer in a very versatile and fast and efficient way, but also mindful of the capabilities that exist in the company that can be brought together to solve that customer's needs. And so that's one facet, is how do we bring more capabilities to market faster and make sure employees, we've got 60,000 engineers in the company. How do we make sure they can communicate, collaborate, and share technology efficiently? The other part is, hey, at the end of the day, we are trying to drive savings as a result of, being a pure and focused aerospace and defense company. And that's where we look at, hey, what is something that's more repeatable, less specific to the industry or the customer base? And then is there a more effective and efficient way for how we maximize it throughout the RTX portfolio to get what we need at the speed we want and with the efficiency we expect?
Yeah, that's very interesting. An executive is only as good as the team he or she has around them. And this has been a complicated time, to say the least, with the Great Resignation, as some have called it. A lot of people just rethinking their relationship with work, especially in light of the pandemic and all that it's kind of wrought, this grand experiment that's been forced upon all of us. Talk a bit about how you've thought, especially over the course of the past couple of years, curating a team to bring to life what you've described.
Yeah, I mean, we have been blessed with a workforce and a team of employees that are doing amazingly, challenging work, innovative work, and we're. I think our CEO's, statement around that is companies don't innovate, people do. And at the end of the day, it's becoming more and more important on the purpose and mission of the company. Right? Do employees understand the impact that their work plays in what they read about in the news or what they sort of experience and see day to day? And I think our employees have great affiliation and great context on the importance of their work and what it means to the world. The second part of it is they also want to see their work fielded at a pace where their contributions result in the changes they want to see in the world and the changes they want to see in the company. And so that's one of the amazing parts of, I said, we're 2 years young. Everybody right now is part of defining this new company. Now you'd probably, you'd laugh at me and say we're a big startup, but I mean, we have a lot of those attributes right now. We are doing a lot of things within the company for the first time and defining things that are going to, be what employees 10, 20, 30 years from now experience are going to be because of decisions that this team's making right here, right now, today. And then the last to your point is, when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, you think about sustainability, you think about the things that really matter personally and in our communities. Those are things that we take seriously. And those are things that, we are trying to, make sure we have a company that reflects the world we live in. We are making sure everybody's balancing personal and professional life right now in light of what's going on. How do we create that flexibility, and how do we take the voice of our employees to define the culture we want to have and the way we want to work? And that those are the things that are going on right here, right now. And those are the reasons why I think we'll continue to see examples where I was talking to someone on my team, her 2 kids work for the company. One's joining like a finance leadership program this year. And that's something that's not out of the norm for RTX. And that's something we'll want to continue to see, is that generational affiliation with the company.
Oh, interesting. Gosh, yeah. Unusual, but wonderful. I'm also curious, you alluded to it in your description of the business that yours is a networked business of a kind. And there's really an ecosystem that surrounds RTX. I mean, you think about the complexity of what you've described as the business. No doubt you need to bring a variety of partners to the party, so to say, to deliver all you've described. And I wonder, especially as the digital leader, how do you think about that concept of ecosystem, and how to, again, speaking of curation, how you think about curating the partnerships that you're leveraging in order to accomplish the speed you described, among other advantages of doing that well?
Yeah, I mean, this is a team sport, right? And we have amazingly bright people in the company that can challenge the laws of physics, right? They literally do. I mean, you've got rocket scientists in the company, but we can't do it alone, right? And there's amazing innovation happening outside of our walls. And so we look at it across a spectrum. We actually have an outreach to startups. So we engaged with over 200 startups last year because we know there are people who are approaching problems that we find important in unique and novel ways. And so we have a way in which we maintain relationships to get smart and stay connected to that speed and velocity of innovation that's happening. And then we've got big partnerships with the logos that you would expect to really redefine how we reimagine the portfolio of the company, including things like, hey, we're going to go to 50% cloud-based by the time we get out of 2023. If you would have talked to either of these companies 5 years ago, cloud would have been blasphemy. And now we'll be over 50%. And we announced a big strategic partnership on how we're going to make that transition. So that's the spectrum. It's a team sport, and we are trying to stay connected with everybody who's trying to solve the same types of challenges we are.
And so innovation is a thread that certainly is pulled through this conversation. The extraordinary things, groundbreaking things, some of them really kind of dreaming up the future, as you talked about. One of the advantages an employee has today is they're going to be dreaming up the things that this organization will be proud of decades from now as well. How do you think a little bit about how do you think about the innovation process more generally speaking? If you're batting 1,000, you're not innovating. So there needs to be a degree of risk tolerance. You need to bring people onto the team who are excited about going into the unknown and exploring a bit, while also making sure that the direction in which they are pursuing innovation supports the strategy, the mission that you referenced of the organization as well. Provide, if you wouldn't mind, a bit of the philosophy that you have, at least when it comes to determining how best to innovate and where to innovate.
Yeah. I would offer two scenarios. One, we were actually having a goal setting conversation with my staff yesterday, and one of the conversation points was, hey, should we be setting a goal that we anticipate achieving 100% of? Or should we be setting a goal where we know we won't achieve 100% of it, and it would be amazing if we got to 70%? So one is, setting those ambitious expectations and, knowing that you are trying to, get farther than you think you can in the time that you have. And so for me, innovation's born between a gap between, resources and ambitions. And that's where innovation forms to solve that gap. The second part is actually like where you put your money, and are you putting your money where your mouth is? And so we look at a philosophy of like 70, 20, 10, right? 70% of our investment should be on things that we can take advantage of and produce results here and now. 20% should be within our planning horizon next, 3 to 5 years. But then we always have, focus and capacity dedicated towards the moonshots, right? The things that being ready for the things that we aren't thinking about today, but knowing what they might look like and what the capabilities might be required to make them possible. So that's a little bit of allowing people to have the ambition and not holding them accountable to like only what you can measure, but leaving space for them to aspire to be able to do more and making sure you're backing it with the capital to allow that to happen.
Really great. You mentioned briefly in your description of your responsibilities the data component of this, and I wanted to dive a little bit further into that, if you wouldn't mind, Vince. So data, of course, is such a prominent topic, especially among the CDO, CIO, CTO community, the tech and digital leaders of major organizations. But one that many companies are at different rungs of the ladder in terms of their maturity, in terms of harnessing it appropriately. And there's a lot of complexity there, as most companies have an ocean of data to potentially leverage. And so oftentimes it's a mixed metaphors, finding a needle in the haystack in terms of the insights themselves. I realize it's a broad topic, but maybe, if there's a means of simplifying it a little bit, how do you think about, developing a sound data strategy to, kind of parse through that significant amount of data to make better decisions?
Yeah, it's like finding a needle in a haystack of needles. So, I would say two things. I would say most importantly, like, what are the outcomes we're looking for? One of the most vivid examples I give is trying to predict when something's going to fail before it will fail. And we have a lot of analytics behind how do you reduce unplanned downtime. When you think about the mission a lot of our products serve, you always want to know it's ready to perform at the push of a button. And so we do a lot on being able to better predict before. Underneath that, we are a complicated company, as you mentioned, and there's data everywhere. And so we are trying to be thoughtful about how do you create an ecosystem and interoperability that allow people to understand what data exists, how to get access to it, what access are you allowed to have to it, but create an environment where you actually have that federated environment. You acknowledge the fact that data exists in a lot of different places. You always want to try and have like less surface area as much as possible and consolidate to make it easier. But realistically, you want to get insights here and now, and the time that it takes to simplify and bring it all to where you want it to be. That's what we are actively working on, is how to make it faster, easier to be able to produce insights that you have high confidence in, realizing the data landscape is not what we would want it to be right here, right now, and have a North Star where we want it to be, but we have to be able to unlock the types of outcomes I shared along the way. So it probably doesn't quench the thirst of, we're all trying to figure this out, but it at least gives you the spirit of like how we're trying to figure it out and maybe the kind of the components of it.
Yeah, no, I like that. Thank you. Thank you for that overview. We've already talked about a number of trends that RTX is taking advantage of, but I wanted to hear at the conclusion of our conversation to see if there are any others that particularly excite you. You talked about the 20 and the 10 portion of your investments that are each of them forward-looking, one a lot further than the other, the 10%, the moonshots that you referenced. As you think about some of the things that are coming down the pipeline, trends you're beginning to leverage or that you're just starting to investigate, what are some of the things that really excite you now, Vince?
There's a lot of analogs of what's going on in auto that is coming to aerospace, electrification. And when we look at, as things become more electric, they become more intelligent, they become more digital. Software becomes such a big driver of the value prop of what the product can't do, or what might be possible beyond. So that's going to be a big part of how we think about aerospace. We talked a bit about digital thread and the importance of simulation. There's also a huge component of autonomy and intelligence. A lot of our products have a lot of embedded intelligence within them. And so how we get smarter and more capable around the role of autonomy in many of the things that we do is going to continue to be big. And then a safer, more connected world. I mean, digital technology is so implicit in that, where this is not only about how do you make an aircraft more efficient or how do you protect the warfighter more effectively. It's now the fact that you're managing the entire ecosystem of the airspace, and how do you actually optimize the overall network? Or when you're talking about a battlefield, how are you making sure it's fully connected so that every asset's aware of what's going on and able to perform and operate as a system? So those on, more connected and more intelligent, autonomy, electrification, those are really big themes. And everything I described about what we're trying to do with digital technology underpins our ability to be successful in those spaces.
That's a great overview. Well, Vince Campisi, thank you for a really dynamic conversation, representative of a remarkable time in the history of this relatively new company, at least as in its current form, as you point out, and some of the really interesting opportunities that you and the team are tackling at present as well. It's been really insightful. Thank you.
Great to spend the time with you, Peter. Enjoy the games this weekend, and I look forward to connecting again soon.
I do as well. Good luck to your Bills.
Likewise.